Which seems to me an obvious answer to a question that everybody has right now.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Plenty of injury talk. Dan Lanning actually gave some insights, not all of them, but plenty of insights on the injury news. I'll keep you up to date with all of that. A lot of thoughts on a variety of players, not just Tez Johnson, who I'm going to start today's show with, and some thoughts on the Big Ten landscape and Oregon basketball. Good start to the year on both sides. But Tez Johnson is not going to play this week or next week, and no one will play during the bye week. And then we don't know. We don't know. Heck, I don't even know. No one can actually confirm that he won't play next week against Wisconsin on the road. It's a pretty reasonable assumption at this point. So, Matt Prame and others were at the press conference, and Matt Prame tweeted the following: Dan Lanning confirms Tez Johnson will be out with his injury. Johnson will be down for the near future, but anticipates he'll be back soon. Says it isn't as serious as originally feared. That is good news. Let's start right there. This is Oregon's leading receiver on the season. He's got the most receptions, yards, and touchdowns. So, yes, it is absolutely good news that Tez Johnson won't miss the rest of the year. And I'll talk about the rest of the injuries that Dan Lanning mentioned later on today's show. But the question becomes, who steps up in Tez's absence? The answer to me is pretty clearly Evan Stewart. Would it surprise you to know that Evan Stewart has under 30 yards receiving in 6 of Oregon's 9 games this year? His other 3 receiving totals are 96, 149 against Ohio State, and 112 against Boise State. That 96-yard effort without a touchdown came against Purdue. Now, he felt more impactful in the Michigan game because he had a long touchdown, and it was nullified because of a penalty. But the reason I say Stewart is the guy who most clearly, I think, takes Tez's targets, not all of them, right? So, Tez in a given game will have 7 and 12 receptions. Well, that's a pretty hefty number of completions that Dylan Gabriel's going to spread elsewhere. And the ball will still be spread around. I don't think Gabriel's going to start force-feeding Evan Stewart. I just think he's the most likely guy to see an increase in production compared to what he has been doing. He and Trayshawn Holden actually, get this, have the exact same number of receiving yards this season. But Tez Johnson is a possession guy, and certainly he can create the explosive play. I wouldn't say it's his forte, and why I would like to have him back in the lineup as soon as possible is for third down. For third down, I think that's the biggest difference. And Justice Lowe is going to see a bigger role, and Trayshawn Holden will see a bigger role. But compared to what they're currently doing now, I think Evan Stewart is the guy who, going into every week, I expect to be Oregon's leading receiver. Right now, that answer clearly is Tez Johnson. But I think that Trayshawn Holden had a great game against Michigan. I mean, phenomenal. Stepped up big time. Has worked his way back after the suspension from the spitting incident against Ohio State, and he's playing like himself. And Oregon needs Trayshawn Holden because he plays on the outside. But the other reason I go to Evan Stewart here is I think Stewart is a much more capable guy of running the routes that Tez Johnson runs. Now, Stewart lines up on the outside, so maybe they put in Justice Lowe, certainly, I think positionally will be the one-to-one replacement, but I wonder if you don't see more Evan Stewart run routes where Tez Johnson used to be. Things like an option route on 3rd and 6, or a drag here, or a quick hitter there. I think Evan Stewart is a lot more capable, and he's the best route runner in this Oregon receiver room. I think that includes Tez Johnson, by the way, and NFL draft scouts would probably agree with me on that front. I think you're going to see Evan Stewart continue to be involved in the downfield passing game, but I think that shifts a little bit more to Trayshawn Holden, and Evan Stewart takes a lot of that underneath stuff, and then Justice Lowe sees a bigger role. So I discussed yesterday as well a question that one of you sent in, which you can always do, YouTube comments, X, all sorts of ways to get a question answered on the show. The question was about Kenyon Sadiq. And does he see a bigger role? I don't think Sadiq's targets change a ton because I think the way that he gets involved in the offense is pretty independent of Tez Johnson. They use him on screen passes. They use him on fly sweeps. They're always designing plays where, like, Kenyon Sadiq very rarely just runs a route and through the progression of Dillon Gabriel sitting in the pocket, just winds up with the football. Most often when Kenyon Sadiq is getting the football, it's because the play is really targeted to go there because he's really good in space and he's great in these screen pass situations. But Evan Stewart is the most NFL capable wide receiver that Oregon has. And I think he's got the entire route tree at his disposal and can step into that Tez Johnson role and be a reliable go-to guy. He's been really good on third down. He's got great hands. He makes contested catches. He has everything you want in a number one receiver, but I think his production is more likely to take a jump forward than anybody else. But certainly, everyone's got to step up. You might see a couple extra targets Terrence Ferguson's way. That's a sure-handed guy who Dillon Gabriel loves looking to on third down and 5 and 4 or whatnot. But I think that Evan Stewart is the guy who's most going to pop, and I think we'll see that this week against Maryland. The next question on Tez Johnson is, when does Oregon need him back by? And to me, that answer is Washington if you can. But with that game being at home, Oregon should be able to take care of business there pretty comfortably. Washington is not a bad team. They're not a great team, but they're certainly not a bad team. The Big Ten championship game, to me, is the clear answer. Because whether, and I'm going to talk about this more later on today's show, whether you're going up against Ohio State or Indiana, you want to have your full assortment of weapons. And I am becoming more and more bullish on Justice Lowe the more I watch him play football. I mean, the routes he can run. This guy's been in the program for the last couple of years, mind you. Like, this is not a brand new true freshman working his way in. No, he's been waiting patiently, and he's got an opportunity here to really capitalize. And maybe he's the guy that sees a huge increase. Certainly, I think his role just kind of continues along what it has been in recent weeks, and you just see more targets for Evan Stewart, because I just think Stewart's got so much more in the bag. But by the time you face either Ohio State or Indiana secondary in that Big Ten championship game, you want to have your full assortment of weapons. You want to have Tez Johnson, because that's somebody who a defensive coordinator has to game plan around and say, okay, we have to take away Tez, and that creates a matchup elsewhere. Are they going to pay that same sort of attention to a guy like Justice Lowe? Does he deserve that same sort of attention? We don't really know, because we haven't seen him consistent. Well, we saw him on Saturday against Michigan without Tez Johnson in the lineup, and he did quite well. That doesn't mean that he's capable of doing it for an extended period of time. That doesn't mean that he isn't. It just means we haven't seen it yet. So I think that the game planning for defenses changes when Tez Johnson's on the field. I'm not as concerned about the return game. I know he had the punt return touchdown against Boise State, but with the way this offense is playing, my number one concern in the punt and kick return game, don't fumble the football. Just get it to Dillon Gabriel and company, and we'll be good from there. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, or become a Locked On Ducks insider to get priority mailbag access and a bunch of other perks. That link is in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. So there are other injuries to discuss, several other injuries to discuss, because Oregon has got a handful of players injured. That's to be expected. It's football. Guys get hurt. Would Jahlil Florence start if he came back? That's coming up next. Hey, Locked On Ducks fans, it's time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. This season, we've pooled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes that you love, ensuring all funds go to the specific player that you choose. And unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. This week, for my Oregon Roy Player of the Week, I'm going with Trayshawn Holden. 6 receptions, over 140 yards. I mean, what more could you have asked for as the Ducks' leading receiver goes down? And Dillon Gabriel still, against a really good defensive line, and granted a beat-up secondary, goes for almost 300 yards and a couple touchdowns. I mean, Trayshawn Holden was huge. He was absolutely huge. Will be going forward. but I think Evan Stewart's going to have some really, really big games. Plus, you don't want to miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Oregon plays still 3 more of those games in the month of November. Just download Roy, create an account, enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you're entered. Download Roy now. Join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check him out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return-on-you for more info. Roy, support the players, change the game. And FanDuel's always changing the game. Why? It's FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Oregon is favored by, 24.5 against Maryland this week. Entirely possible they cover. Also entirely possible they do not cover. I know, crazy hot take from me here. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And, well, you go bet Oregon money line and make that happen. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Do you realize how great that is? Everything you want over there. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Would Jahlil Florence start if he came back from injury? That's an interesting question. The good news is I don't feel like there is a big pressing need for Florence, who, if healthy, I had projected as a starter coming into this year because, well, when he was healthy last year, he was a starter in Oregon secondary, and the guy currently starting in his place, Nico Reed, was his backup a season ago. So it's easy to think that if Florence comes back and is fully healthy, he could be Oregon's starting outside corner opposite of Jabbar Muhammad, who's, of course, going nowhere in the starting rotation because he's exactly what we thought we were getting when he came in the transfer portal this past offseason from Washington. But Matt Prame tweeted out that Dan Lanning anticipates wide receiver Gary Bryant, offensive lineman Davey Uli, and cornerback Jahlil Florence will all be available to play at some point this season. They've all missed every game this season due to injuries. He also said Marcus Harper is expected back this year. That's what Dan Lanning said when talking about Marcus Harper. So a lot of guys to talk about, but I want to start with Florence because I think it's the most interesting, and then I'll get to Harper and the other guys as well. I don't know that Florence would be reinserted into the starting lineup because similar to the offensive line, certainly a couple of outside corners, yeah, it's not as communication-based between those two particular guys, but you have to know coverage assignments and not blow any, and Oregon hasn't had really any major blown coverages on the back end of the defense this year, and Nico Reed has played really well. He's Oregon's second highest graded corner, and I think his overall grade would be a lot higher. When you look at Pro Football Focus, they've got him at a 75.6 overall, 85.3 against the run, which is incredibly good, and 73.5 in coverage. He's only a 49.8 in pass rush, but how often do you see Oregon blitzing Nico Reed? Not often. It's not really what he does. If they want to blitz a defensive back, they send Brandon Johnson from the nickel spot, or they put in Dante Manning, who I think has been good in pass rush spots throughout his career, and he has the second highest pass rush grade of any Oregon cornerback right now. So if Florence came back, at the very least, you would have the depth, the confidence of depth in that secondary that you have a starting capable player who's coming in if Muhammad goes down, or if Nico Reed were to go down, or Brandon Johnson as well, because I think Florence can play some nickel, or at least Nico Reed could certainly play some nickel as well. I think either one of those guys have both cross-trained at practice over the last year or so at that position. So I'm all for getting Florence back. I've been a big fan of his ever since he got to Oregon. He played as a true freshman. He started last year, and he was solid. He was absolutely solid. I don't know that he comes in and replaces Nico Reed. I think it's a Tom Brady situation where it's like, look, it's not that we don't like you or think you're any good, but this other guy's playing really well, and I wouldn't want to disrupt Nico Reed's mojo. And Nico Reed deserves a lot of flowers. I don't know that I've had him as an individual standout enough this year because against Ohio State specifically, one thing we were talking about going into that game is, hey, Jabbar Muhammad's on one side. We know how good that guy is. But Nico Reed's on the other. He could get picked on a little bit. Well, I never really saw that. I thought he did more than holding his own. He had some really, really good coverage moments, and he's been great this year. So I think if Florence comes back, he's on the two deep. I don't think he automatically slides in to start for Nico Reed or Brandon Johnson, who just continues to be really, really good and has a solid PFF grade to show for it as well. Not that that's everything, but it's certainly a data point. They look at every snap. We look at a lot of snaps, shall we say. But that's the first injury. Second injury, Marcus Harper, Dave Uli, interior offensive line guys. So I didn't see any quotes or hear anything about Matthew Bedford. Not entirely sure what's happening there. But Kavika Rogers, and some of you corrected me on the pronunciation there, which I thank you for. I am not infallible. Just because I have a microphone doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. So if you hear something and it doesn't sound right, shoot me a message. Let me know. I might have gotten it wrong. And I was saying it Kawika, but it's Kavika Rogers. And he came in for Marcus Harper at guard. But Dan Lanning's remark about Harper was, well, we'll see him again at some point this year. And he expects to see Dave Uli at some point as well. I don't know when some point is. I'd imagine if they're not 100%, they don't play against Maryland unless it really starts to get dire. I think you give Rogers the opportunity to start. This is not a Maryland team that should be able to hang around with Oregon. And yeah, throwing wrinkles into the offensive line, not ideal. If Harper's healthy, if he's healthy enough to play, yeah, he probably will. But I'd much rather have him at 100% or 90% for Wisconsin than play him at 70 to 75% against Maryland and risk him getting dinged up further. I would prefer to have him take that week off. I think Oregon can survive pretty solidly against Maryland. They don't scare me in a whole lot of ways. We'll be talking about them more throughout the week, of course. But I think Oregon is just a much better team across the board, and Maryland's not completely terrible. I mean, they beat USC, so that's something. That's something at the very least. USC, best 4-5 team in the country. No joke, they probably are, but they're still a 4-5 team. But anyway, so Maryland is not a team that scares me enough to where I'd say, boy, I'd like this guy to play. Wisconsin is. Wisconsin, do I expect Oregon to win the game? Yes. I predicted Oregon to go 12-0 before the year. I've not wavered off of that particular prediction. I have not changed any of my game picks the week of this year. Wisconsin on the road. Wisconsin's a better team than Maryland, and it's on the road. Maryland's at home in the cozy confines of Austin Stadium this week. I think that you use this as an opportunity to get those guys back healthy because, yeah, if Harper gets dinged up, I would much rather see Dave Uli, who I think has more playing experience than Kavika Rogers at guard. Rogers has gone back and forth between tackle and guard, and Mason Graham is not a fair testing point. He certainly didn't impress in a big way on Saturday, but he's in that spot on the depth chart for a reason. And maybe he can go out against Maryland and give us all a lot more confidence. But right now, I'd say, I would rather not go to Wisconsin or play against Washington, who has a solid defense with a backup right guard in there. So I don't know what play at some point this season means. Lanning knows he's probably going to the Big Ten Championship Game, or at the very least, he's going to the college football playoff. I suspect Tez Johnson will be back for the college football playoff. I suspect Marcus Harper will be back for that time. The question is, which game do they return for prior to that moment? And that leads me to the last injury update. Lots of those on Monday, but guess what? It was a busy time for Dan Lanning talking about injuries at the press conference. Gary Bryant Jr., another guy who, if he were healthy right now, and Dan Lanning expects him to play this year at some point, hasn't played yet this season due to injury, he'd probably be poised for the biggest jump with Tez Johnson's injury. So if Gary Bryant Jr. is available, I think he gets a lot of snaps this year. Nice one, Spencer. I think he gets a lot of snaps this week against Maryland to work him into the rotation. I don't know if it would be as many as Justice Lowe. Like, what is Justice Lowe not showing you? He blocks, he plays hard, he runs good routes, he catches the ball, he's got some yards after catch to him. I mean, he's shown a lot this year. So, frankly, at this point, Justice Lowe, Gary Bryant Jr., I see those guys as pretty interchangeable on the depth chart in my view. So, I'm not overly concerned about the receiving corps no matter who is there. I'm much more concerned with what the offensive line is going to look like and how those guys can work their way back from injury. So hopefully Harper's okay. There have been indications that he is, but how okay? Don't know. Dan Lanning saying we expect him at some point this season isn't exactly specific, but hey, Dan Lanning talked about injuries, and that is a step in the right direction. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. I'm sure you will have a plenty, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. I want to talk about the Big Ten landscape. Because there are two teams that Oregon could play in the Big Ten championship game. Technically three, but really it's two. Would you rather play Ohio State or Indiana? That's coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol, a probiotic drink that is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut, and it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember, make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. As someone who's had personal experience with this particular product, allow me to tell you, this thing works phenomenally well. You will feel great during, you will feel great immediately after, you will feel great the next day. Good to go. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege, learn more, get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnCollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, you won't be. They'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege, use code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. All right, so Oregon controls their own destiny to get to the Big Ten championship game. Shout out Ohio State. They beat Penn State, the tiebreaker scenarios that everyone was all hot and bothered about. It's working itself out. I saw something on Twitter today that there's a scenario if like 5 games go a certain way, the SEC could be an 8-way tie for first place in a few weeks. It is fun to speculate about because it's crazy. Guess what? It has a tendency to work itself out. The SEC could still get wild, but the Big Ten is going to be Oregon, unless they drop any of their next 3 games. And even if they do drop any of those games, well, I think they'd still be in pretty good shape against either Indiana or Penn State. Sorry, Ohio State, not Penn State. Ho-ho, Freudian slip. I'd love to play Penn State in the Big Ten championship game because I don't think the Nittany Lions are very good. I think Washington's going to give them a run for their money this week, even though it's the whiteout game. Now, Washington has a tendency to step on a rake and whack themselves in the face, so I don't know that they'll win, but I think they can at the very least push them because Penn State is good, but not great, which is standard operating procedure for James Franklin's program over there. But for Oregon, the question of Indiana versus Ohio State, I saw this while I was perusing the YouTube comments the other day, and I see it all the time. I hear it from college football fans all the time. Indiana hasn't played anyone. Okay. Let's get something inexplicably clear. Indiana is really good. They are really good, and they are really underrated. I made this point over on Locked On College Football today. You can go check it out. But here's a quick summation for you. Indiana, no, they haven't played a barn burner of a schedule yet. They are beating those opponents that they've played so far by 33 points per game. 33 points per game. That is some 2010 Chip Kelly stuff. Because you know what? That team didn't have a whole heck of a lot of great wins aside from a top 10 win against Stanford in early Pac-12 play, or Pac-10 play back in the day, RIP. But they play a lot of teams, and they beat everybody by 30, 40, 50, like whatever it was. They beat Nebraska, who's going to be a bowl team this year, 56-7. 56-7. Nebraska the next week goes into Columbus and takes Ohio State down to the wire. Nebraska's not a great team. They lost to UCLA this past weekend, but they're something. They're decent. 56-7. If Oregon beat a team 56-7 in conference play, wouldn't matter who it is. How'd you be feeling right now? You wouldn't be able to ask those first world questions about Oregon's not scoring in the third quarter. How big of a problem is this? So would I rather play Indiana or Ohio State? Quite frankly, I don't have that big of a preference. Oregon's playing Oregon every week, as Dan Lanning loves to say. But the idea that Indiana, well, I just don't know about this. I don't know about that. Well, let's see how they do against Michigan this week. I have a feeling they're going to take them to the woodshed. Michigan State had them down 10-0. They won 47-10. Or 40, what was it, 42-10? 47, what was it? Hold on. Let me get this right because always try to be as accurate as I can on here. Wait for it. Yeah, 47-10. They went on a 47-0 run against Michigan State. Bigger margin of victory against the Spartans on the road than Oregon had against Michigan State at home. Yeah, I know Dylan Gabriel threw a couple of red zone interceptions. Their guy didn't. I didn't watch every snap of the game, but don't think Curtis Rourke had a couple of red zone interceptions in that game. He had 263 and 4 touchdowns. Indiana's just really good. So don't overlook the Hoosiers here and think, well, they just haven't played anybody yet. No, if you are a team, they should not be ranked 8th in the country. They should be ranked inside the top 5. 100%. Like 100% across the board. So I don't want to overlook Indiana, and I think Oregon can beat either one of those teams. Obviously, they beat Ohio State. I think Oregon can lose to either one of those teams. Absolutely. Absolutely possible. Indiana is really good. They have a really good coach, and they're playing really good football. That's just the way it is right now. So let's wrap up with some basketball talk here. Got underway. Great start to the season for Dana Altman's team, for Kelly Graves' team. Is Oregon women's basketball back? Too soon to tell, but they trounced California Baptist, and they made threes. Those are two things that you didn't say about the women's team a season ago. So a good start for a transfer-laden roster. On the other side, I live 2.5 hours from Vegas. I love that city. It's great. I'm going in early December with a buddy. I'll go again in the spring. I'll make up an excuse to go there anytime. It's fun. Odds makers in that city are off their rocker. So Oregon closes as a 16.5 point favorite against UC Riverside. They led by 15.5 at the half. UC Riverside made a kind of a charge. They got it down to 7, but the Oregon never let it get close. They hit a 3. UC Riverside did with like 21 seconds left to go from down, I think it was 17 to down 15.5, or to go from down 18, aka Oregon covering, to down 15, UC Riverside covering. Vegas is so good. It's so unbelievably good. KJ Evans was awesome. And Kwame Evans Jr. is somebody who I have been the leader of the fan club for a very long time. Yeah, showed the whole repertoire there. Oregon's offense in a good place. Defense, 76 points at home against a Big West team. Yeah, that's not great, but Dana Altman will get that right. Dana Altman will figure that out. And Oregon didn't shoot it great from 3, didn't shoot it poorly, but Brandon Angel, 17 points in his Oregon debut. He's just crazy efficient. 5 of 7 and from the floor. Didn't make his only 3-point attempt. 7 of 7 at the line. Nate Biddle had 16 points, 11 rebounds, and a couple of blocks. Jackson Shellstad, not his best day, but still is making plays all over the place. TJ Bomba had 12 points. Like, Oregon looked good. Not great. Not great because good teams win, great teams cover, but it's a solid start. It is an absolutely solid start. You don't have the epitome of brutality. Balanced scoring. Depth was showcased. The defense will improve as these guys gel together. And I liked what I saw. And KJ Evans popping, I'm always here for that. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.